Chapter 6 of the Alps, the Danube, and the Near East. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Betty B. Venice. Leaving Switzerland by sleeper, I made a night trip to Venice and awoke this morning just as my train started to cross the lagoons among which rises the Queen of the Adriatic. Looking out of my car window, I found we were passing over swamps cut into blocks of vegetation. A little later, the swamps disappeared. There was no land at the side of the train, and I could look far out over the water to a thin strip of green in the distance. There were boats everywhere, long caravans of coal boats pulled by tugs, barges of freight moving this way and that, motor boats chugging along. After traveling for more than 2 miles through the water, our train stopped at the station with the Grand Canal at the front steps. I might have taken one of the small steamers that now ply along the main canals of the city, but I preferred a gondola, a long narrow boat with its prow and stern upturned so that they seemed to rise as high as my head. Like all the gondolas of Venice, it was painted jet black, a fashion that dates back to the 15th century. At that time, the Venetians were vying with each other in costly decorations on their boats, to such an extent that a law was passed making black the universal rule. My boat was not more than 4 feet wide, and it wobbled as I plumped down in the seat in the center. The gondolier stood upright on the deck behind me and swayed as he pushed and pulled his one oar this way and that. He knew the shortcuts and took me down the Grand Canal and past the great palaces that line its whole length. Every time I come to Venice, I find it hard to realize what she is, and still harder to realize what she was. Other cities are more or less alike. Venice is unique. Her population of 200,000 is crowded together into buildings that occupy a space about 7 miles in circumference and appear to be afloat in the Adriatic. Her streets are lanes of water on which boats serve as cabs. Moreover, she is enriched by some of the most beautiful specimens of architecture in all Italy, and adorned with the master strokes of Titian and Tintoretti. By the 15th century, Venice, then in the zenith of her power, was one of the great cities of the earth. In her dockyards, the largest in the world, 10,000 beams of oak were always ready for the construction of new ships. Her merchant vessels sailed all the known seas. Her war galleys were feared from the Rock of Gibraltar to the Bosporus, and Constantinople acknowledged her sway. Her ships passed beyond the Golden Horn and into the Black Sea to trade with Russia, and brought goods from Asia to the port of Venice, whence they were carried over the Alps to Central and Northern Europe. Thus, 500 years ago, before Columbus had worked out his idea of a new way to the wealth of India, and long before the age of modern invention and machinery, Venice held the gorgeous East in fee and was the safeguard of the West. All this glorious past is the background of the Venice of today. Though built upon piles driven into the earth, the palaces stand up well, and for the most part, the city seems as solid as the traditional house built upon the rocks. Yet the houses appear everywhere to rise on no other foundation than the water. One can scarcely realize that Venice is really scattered over 117 islands, and so has terra firma beneath her buildings. Hence the structures along its canals and streets do not lean drunkenly like many of those of Rotterdam or Amsterdam or other so-called Venices. I say streets advisedly, since Venice is a city of streets as well as canals. The streets cut up the islands and cross the canals on 400 bridges, some of which are as beautifully arched as those of China or Japan. In a gondola trip, one winds in and out through a labyrinth of one narrow waterway after another, shadowed by span after span of stone. The bridges are 6 or 8 feet above the water, and all freight-carrying boats must be loaded with this in mind. The oldest of the bridges is the Rialto, constructed in the 16th century to replace the earlier bridge of wood. For centuries, this was the only one over the Grand Canal. It rises 25 feet above the water in a huge marble span of 90 feet. Little shops are built along it, leaving a central alleyway about 20 feet wide between them and an outer passage on each side. A stream of people is continually passing back and forth upon it. For, as in the days when the shrewd merchants of Venice drove their hard bargains here, and Antonio pledged his pound of flesh to Shylock, this is still a busy quarter of the city. Standing on the peak of the Rialto Bridge, one sees streets lined with awnings and filled with people. A thing that strikes one in looking over Venice is the fact that there is not much green. I was about to say there are no trees, but this is not true. Here and there the wealthy owner of a palace has had some earth brought in and has planted a tree in his courtyard. Some of the larger palaces have real gardens, and there are places where terraces of vegetation rise up from the water to the ivy-covered marble structures along the Grand Canal. Riding through Venice in a gondola, one can easily imagine the cruelties of its past. If he does not raise his eyes, he might think he was in a city of prisons, for the windows and doors of the lower stories are covered with rusty iron bars, behind which is a heavy wire netting with a mesh so fine that your little finger would not go through. I suppose, though, that these are merely precautions against theft. The city is wonderfully quiet. I know of no place less noisy, except perhaps Nizhny Novgorod, the great fair city of Russia, between its annual events. While the fair lasts, it has perhaps 3 times as many people in it as the Venice of today. But for the remainder of the year, it is as dead as Nineveh and Babylon, or Sodom and Gomorrah after the fire. Sitting in a Venetian gondola, one does not hear the honk of the automobile, the rumble of the motor truck, the chug 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 of the motorcycle, or even the clatter of horses' feet upon the stone sidewalks. In fact, there is no street in Venice that a man could safely ride through on horseback, and there is none wide enough for a motorcycle with sidecar. But let us be going to St. Mark's Place, the real heart of Venice. It is only 3/4 of a mile from our hotel, so we shall walk. We pass along a busy street lined with shops and buzzing with tourists. Venice is forever alive with tourists, a fact of which the storekeepers take the utmost advantage. The shops remind us of those of Atlantic City, except that the goods displayed are more artistic. Scores of places sell only the beads or the leather goods for which the town is famed. The throng is a gay one, and there seems more life and color in it than in the crowds of the Rue de la Paix or the Rue de Rivoli in Paris. The people are well dressed. Venice used to be called a city of paupers, and it may be one still, but one would not judge so from our walk of this morning. Winding our way in and out through the narrow walls of stores, we come at length to the Piazza of St. Mark, the patron saint of Venice. On 3 sides the great square is enclosed by marble palaces blackened by the wind and weather of years. On the east side is the pride of the city, the Cathedral of St. Mark. At first it was only the private chapel of the Doge, or chief magistrate, of the old Republic of Venice, but it grew in size and importance with the growth of the city-state. A law required every merchant trading to the east to bring back something for the adornment of the church. In richness of material and decoration, it is said to be unique among all the churches of the earth. St. Mark's covers acres and is a veritable museum of wonders. Volumes have been written about its beauties and its treasures, but I shall write only of the mosaics covering its walls and ceilings. They are on a golden background, which has given the cathedral the name of the Church of Gold. Some of the work dates back to the 10th century. Here are the stories of the Bible told in pictures made of millions of pieces of enamel, marble, and gold leaf set together. Some represent only Old Testament subjects. In one dome are shown the creation of the world and the fall of man. In the next are pictured the flood, the ark with Noah, and the Tower of Babel. Here are portrayed pictures of Joseph being sold down into Egypt by his brothers, and all the incidents of the history of Moses. You may read the life of Christ in these mosaics and the wonderful happenings in the lives of the saints. The marvel about it is that the little pieces of which these pictures are made are each not larger than your little fingernail. If you will take 450 ordinary city lots and pave them with mosaics so that every inch of the space is a picture made up of bits of this kind, you may get some idea of the labor the mosaic decoration of St. Mark's represents. Leaving the cathedral, one passes beneath the 4 bronze horses, which no one knows how old. Through the centuries they have traveled many a mile. They were apparently designed for some Roman general's triumphal arch, but by whose hand remains a mystery. At any rate, in 1204, the Doge of Venice brought them to his city from Constantinople. Here they remained for nearly 600 years. Then Napoleon carried them off and set them up in Paris. From the shadow of the Tuileries they watched his triumphs, but not for long. After Waterloo they were restored to Venice and mounted once more upon their pedestals. Even then they could not rest undisturbed. A century later, when the city feared extinction from the enemy airplanes continually flying back and forth over her and dropping bombs from the skies, the bronze horses of St. Mark's were taken down and hidden away. After the World War had ended, they were brought out and set again on their vantage point overlooking the piazza. As I gazed up at these beautiful glittering horses today, I saw at least 500 pigeons perched upon them. I can't give the actual count, but there were thousands of live pigeons hovering over St. Mark's and filling the great square in front of it. They nest in the nooks of the palaces surrounding the square, which they practically own. No one thinks of disturbing them, and a Venetian boy with a bean shooter who would kill one of those birds would go instantly to prison. In some way or other, the people have the idea that they mean good luck to the city. In olden times, they were sent out from the vestibule of the cathedral on Palm Sunday, and during the time of the Republic, they were fed at government expense. There are literally swarms of them, and one can sit and watch their antics as they feed and play. A good business in the square is making photographs of the pigeons eating out of the hands and even from the heads of the tourists. There are peddlers who sell corn, split peas, and beans to those who wish to feed the birds, and the photographers will take about a half pint of the grain and pour it over your hands and even on your head. As soon as they drop the corn on you, the pigeons come in swarms. I tried holding out my hands and soon had so many gathered there that my arms ached with their weight. They fluttered down also on my head, sinking their claws into the wool of my cap and finally pulling it off. From St. Mark's, a smaller plaza, the Piazzetta, stretches down to the waters. On the edge of the Piazzetta rise 2 granite columns brought from Syria or Constantinople and set up here in the 12th century. One column is capped by a statue of St. Theodore, once patron saint of the Republic, standing on a crocodile, while on the other is the winged lion of St. Mark. The Venetians have a phrase, between Theodore and Mark, which means about the same as our between hammer and anvil, or between the devil and the deep blue sea. The saying probably comes from the fact that once state offenders were put to death on a scaffold set up between these columns. Their backs were always turned to the city that had cast them off, while their faces looked out to sea, the symbol of eternity. Now the old shafts throw their shadows upon dozens of gondolas tied up at the canal pier, and instead of the cries of the condemned, one hears the soft Italian voices of the gondoliers chanting each the advantages of his craft for a swift row up the Grand Canal and back to one's hotel. End of chapter 6.